The galaxy had long since fallen under the oppressive rule of the Tyrant, a being of unimaginable power and cruelty. His empire stretched across countless star systems, casting a shadow over the known universe. Planets trembled at the mere mention of his name. Zalfar, the Mad Conqueror, a being of alien origin. Zalfar had fused his genetics with those of numerous species, making him a terrifying force of nature. His once mighty armies were now mere extensions of his will, and he held the galaxy in a grip of iron. Humanity, once a proud race of explorers and pioneers, had been crushed under his boot. Earth was nothing but a desolate, lifeless husk, its once thriving cities reduced to rubble. The survivors, those who had managed to escape the initial onslaught, now lived in hiding across the stars. Some had become slaves, working in the mining pits of alien worlds. Others had been forced into refugee camps, living in constant fear. Hope had almost vanished from the hearts of humankind. But in the darkness, a flicker of resistance remained. Captain Alex Winters, a former military officer who had once commanded forces in the defense of Earth, stood at the edge of a ruined colony on the fringe of the galaxy. His eyes scanned the horizon, where the last remnants of humanity's future lay. The rebellion, made up of scattered cells and rogue factions, had been fighting in the shadows for years. It was a small hope in a galaxy that had nearly forgotten the idea of freedom. "We can't win this war with a handful of soldiers," Winters muttered under his breath, wiping away the grime from his face. The small camp he commanded was barely a blip on the Tyrant's radar. Most of the world thought humanity's fight was over, a relic of the past. The Tyrant had made sure of that. Winters and his ragtag group of survivors, fighters, engineers, scientists, and ex-soldiers, were all that stood between the galaxy and the final extinction of humanity. A sudden shock broke his concentration. He turned to see one of his scouts running toward him, a look of panic in his eyes. "Captain, we've spotted a Tyrant fleet moving in. They're heading straight for this planet." Winters cursed under his breath. "How long do we have?" "Less than 2 hours before they land," the scout replied. "We need to move fast." For a moment, Winters stood still, his mind racing. The Tyrant's forces were relentless. A single fleet would be enough to annihilate the last of the resistance on this planet. The entire fight for humanity's survival had come down to this: outsmarting the Tyrant, taking back a foothold, no matter how small. "Get the others ready," Winters ordered. "We can't afford to lose this base. It's all we have left to strike back." As the scout hurried off, Winters gathered the core of his team, veterans of countless battles, each one scared but unwilling to back down. He knew the coming battle was one of desperation, but in his heart he felt something stir, a defiant spark that refused to be extinguished. This would not be the end. Not while humanity still had breath in its lungs. Captain Winters stared at the crumbling map spread out on the table in front of him, his fingers tracing the outline of distant systems. The galaxy was vast, and yet it felt so small under the Tyrant's rule. Humanity had been scattered across the stars like dust in the wind. Winters knew that if they were to survive, they needed more than just grit and determination. They needed allies. "We can't do this alone," Winters muttered, his voice low as he glanced around the dimly lit room. The remaining members of his resistance were gathered around him, old comrades who had been with him through thick and thin, but even they knew the odds were too great. A single fleet of Tyrant ships could wipe out everything they had built in a matter of hours. If they had any hope of standing a chance, they needed to unite with other oppressed civilizations. "There's a place we can go," said Alara, an alien diplomat and one of Winters' most trusted allies. "A world on the edge of the Ugrax Nebula. The Talnari, a proud warrior race, have been fighting the Tyrant for years in secret. But they've been silenced. Too many of their own people have been imprisoned or destroyed. If we can reach them, they might be able to help." Winters didn't hesitate. The Talnari were known across the galaxy for their fierce independence and unyielding loyalty to their own kind. Yet they had fallen silent in recent years, presumably crushed by the tyrant's forces. If the resistance could reach them, it could spark something much larger than a mere rebellion. It could be the ignition for a galaxy-wide uprising. The Talnari's homeworld, Talamara, was located on the fringes of the galaxy, nestled within the treacherous Ugrax Nebula. The journey to Talamara would be perilous. The nebula was filled with unstable currents and violent electromagnetic storms, making navigation difficult, and the tyrant's fleets often patrolled the outer edges, ensuring no one escaped or entered without his knowledge. "We can't waste any time," Winters said firmly, rising from the table. "Prepare the ship. We leave within the hour." The crew wasted no time. The Resistance had a stolen ship, an old warship from the pre-Tyrant era, heavily modified and patched up over the years. It wasn't the most advanced vessel, but it was fast, small, and perfect for a covert mission. As the crew scrambled to get ready, Winters stood at the bridge, staring out into the dark void of space. He could feel the weight of the responsibility on his shoulders, but he had no other choice. The Talnari were their best shot at survival. As they jumped into the cold expanse of hyperspace, the tension was palpable. The ship hummed quietly as it glided through the vastness. For the first time in years, Winters allowed himself a moment of hope. Perhaps this mission would work. Perhaps there were still other species out there willing to fight for freedom, just like humanity. But deep down, he knew that they couldn't afford failure. If they did, the tyrant's grip on the galaxy would only tighten, and the last hope of the human race would slip away. The Talnari were their only chance, but even if they succeeded in gaining their aid, would it be enough? The tyrant's forces were vast, and Korak, the tyrant's ruthless enforcer, was never far behind. "We'll make it," Winters muttered to himself, determination hardening his resolve. "We have to." The journey to Talamara was a gamble, one that Captain Winters knew could either shift the balance of power in the galaxy or end with the human resistance shattered. The ship rocketed through the treacherous Ugrax Nebula, navigating through violent storms and fields of electromagnetic turbulence. Winters stood on the bridge, his fingers clenched around the control panel as the crew worked frantically to maintain the ship's course. The faint hum of the engines was the only sound that accompanied the tense silence. As they neared the outer rim of the nebula, the ship's radar began to flicker, signaling the presence of tyrant ships. Winters cursed under his breath. They hadn't even reached their destination, and already the enemy was closing in. "Get us to the Talnari homeworld, now," Winters barked, his voice steady despite the growing panic inside him. Alara, who had once been a diplomat to the Talnari, was by his side, offering technical advice on how to avoid detection. "They're already on our tail," she warned. "If we don't change course and jump to a new trajectory, we'll be caught in their scanner range. The Talnari will have no chance." "Do it," Winters said without hesitation. "We'll lose the fleet, but we'll buy them enough time to launch their own counterattack. We have to trust that the Talnari can hold their ground." With a calculated jump into the unknown, the ship veered into an uncharted region of space. The crew fought to keep everything under control as their hyperspace calculations went awry. Outside the hull, the chaotic dance of swirling energy made the stars seem like blurs of light, giving Winters a momentary feeling of disorientation. But it wasn't enough to distract him. "We've lost them," the ship's navigator reported after what felt like an eternity. "We're safe, for now." But Winters knew it wouldn't last. The tyrant's forces were vast and relentless. He had barely taken a breath when a loud crackle of static filled the bridge's comm system. A chilling voice boomed over the speakers, sending a shiver down the spine of every person in the room. "This is Korak," the voice rumbled, low and menacing, filled with the weight of years of bloodshed. "I am the tyrant's right hand. You are harboring a dream that will soon be crushed. No matter where you run, no matter how far you hide, you will not escape me. I will hunt you down. You cannot outrun my vengeance." The message ended abruptly, leaving an unsettling silence. Korak, the tyrant's enforcer, was a living weapon. Genetically altered and enhanced, he was a monster of unmatched ferocity. His name was enough to send shivers through the heart of any resistance fighter. He had hunted down entire fleets, crushed rebellions, and brought countless species to their knees. Winter's heart pounded in his chest. It was clear now. Korak wasn't just a shadow following them. He was already on their trail, and he wouldn't stop until he had wiped out every last resistance fighter, human and alien alike. "We need to hurry," Winters said, his voice low, filled with determination. "No matter what happens, we can't let him catch up to us before we reach the Talnari." The crew scrambled to make final adjustments, racing against time. The threat of Korak's looming presence felt suffocating. Yet even as the dark specter of death hovered over them, the human resistance remained resolute. They had come this far. They weren't about to let fear stop them now. But one thing was certain. If they didn't find a way to deal with Korak soon, their struggle would be over before it had even truly begun. The tension on the bridge was palpable as the ship flew deeper into uncharted space, a thin thread of hope holding the resistance together. Winters stood at the front, his eyes fixed on the rapidly approaching Talnari homeworld, Talamara, visible on the view screen. It was a beautiful world, lush and green with sprawling mountain ranges and vast oceans, a stark contrast to the barren wastelands humanity had left behind. But even the beauty of this world couldn't mask the weight of the impending battle. "We're almost there," Alara said, her voice steady, though it betrayed a hint of worry. "But if we don't find shelter in the Talnari stronghold before the Tyrant's fleet catches up to us, we'll be vulnerable." Winters nodded. The ship was now running on fumes, the fuel reserves dangerously low after their hasty escape. A fight with Korak's forces would be their last stand unless they could find some way to delay him. Their only advantage was surprise. The Tyrant's fleets didn't know the Talnari had remained hidden. The hope was that the Talnari warriors would be able to muster a defense before Korak arrived. "Get ready," Winters said as he turned to his crew. "We're not out of the fire yet. This mission is too important. If we fail here, the rebellion dies." As the ship entered Talamara's atmosphere, the crew was jolted by turbulence. The ship shook violently as it descended, straining against the natural forces of the planet's thick air. Winters gripped the armrest of his seat, his pulse racing. They had only one shot at making this work. "We need to make it to the Talnari's inner fortress," Alara said, scanning the planet's surface. "It's deep in the mountains, hidden away from the Tyrant's prying eyes." Winters gave a sharp nod. "Plot the course. Let's hope the Talnari still trust us." The ship touched down in a secluded valley, surrounded by dense forests. Winters and his team disembarked, weapons ready, faces grim with anticipation. The Talnari stronghold was built into the heart of the mountains, a sprawling complex of stone and metal, designed to withstand even the most brutal assaults. The resistance had barely been able to prepare for the confrontation, and Winters knew that even if they'd made it into the stronghold, it would not guarantee their safety. They had to convince the Talnari to join the fight. As they entered the stronghold, the resistance was met by a group of Talnari warriors. Their red-skinned, muscular frames were intimidating, and their eyes, sharp and calculating, studied the humans with suspicion. Their reputation as fierce and independent was well known, and their history with humans had been less than cordial. But Alara spoke their language fluently and had been an envoy for years before the Tyrant's rise to power. "Let me do the talking," she said, stepping forward. "These warriors respect strength, but they also value loyalty. We can't afford to waste time convincing them of our cause." The Talnari leader, a towering figure named Carrick, stepped forward. He eyed Winters and the other humans before speaking in a voice like thunder. "You bring us nothing but more war. Why should we risk our people for a fight that does not concern us?" Winters stepped forward, his gaze unwavering. "Because we fight for something more than ourselves. We fight for freedom for every oppressed species in this galaxy. If we fail, the Tyrant will destroy everything you've built, and he'll come for you too." Carrick remained silent for a long moment, his piercing gaze never leaving Winters. It felt like an eternity, the weight of the decision hanging heavy in the air. Finally, Carrick spoke, his voice low but resolute. "We will aid you, but know this, our people will not follow you into battle unless you prove your worth." Winters nodded. The test had begun. The Talnari would not join the fight easily, but they had made the first step. Now, the real challenge lay ahead, proving that humanity had the strength to lead the galaxy in a battle against the tyrant. Carrick's challenge hung in the air, a weight that seemed to press down on Winters' shoulders. The Talnari were known for their brutal tests of strength and combat, and it was clear that the fate of humanity's alliance with them would hinge on whether Winters and his team could survive their trial. The warriors' eyes were cold and calculating, awaiting their leader's signal. "You seek our aid," Carrick said, his voice a low growl. "But before you earn our trust, you must prove yourselves worthy. In the ancient ways of our people, you will face a trial, a test of endurance, skill, and willpower. Only those who survive it may stand with us in battle." Winters exchanged a brief glance with his crew. They had fought in numerous battles, faced impossible odds, and seen things no one should ever have to endure. But this was something entirely different. The Talnari weren't interested in simple diplomacy. They wanted to see the mettle of humanity's warriors firsthand. "We accept," Winters said, his voice unwavering despite the gravity of the moment. Carrick nodded and signaled to his warriors, who began to prepare an arena. The resistance members were led to a circular stone platform, situated deep within the stronghold's training grounds. A high wall of jagged rock surrounded the arena, and the Talnari gathered in a ring around the edge, watching with silent intensity. The air was thick with anticipation. The first test was brutal, a physical gauntlet designed to push their bodies to the limit. Winters and his team were faced with an obstacle course that included climbing sheer rock walls, dodging energy traps, and outpacing massive mechanical beasts designed to simulate the tyrant's enforcers. It was a grueling test of agility, speed, and raw endurance. Winters led the charge, leaping across chasms and scrambling up cliffs with surprising speed. His military training kicked in, and he moved like a well-oiled machine. The rest of his team followed suit, their determination driving them forward. But the obstacles were unforgiving. A particularly vicious energy trap fired blasts of charged plasma at them, and one of the resistance fighters, an ex-soldier named Juno, took a direct hit. She crumpled to the ground, but Winters wasn't about to let her fall. "Juno, get up," he yelled, extending a hand. "We don't stop until we finish this." Juno's eyes burned with pain and exhaustion, but she took his hand, her grip firm. "I'm not giving up," she gasped. Together, they pushed through the gauntlet, their hearts pounding and their bodies aching. It felt as if the world was pressing in on them, each challenge more daunting than the last. But they refused to relent. As the last obstacle neared, an enormous mechanical creature designed to mimic the tyrant's brutal enforcers, Winters felt the adrenaline surge through him. The creature was a monstrosity, its mechanical limbs capable of crushing bones with a single blow. The resistance members had no weapons, only their fists and the raw power of their resolve. Winters knew that this was the true test, not just strength, but the will to survive. "Take it down," Winters ordered, his voice filled with fire. With a unified shout, the resistance fighters launched themselves at the beast, using their agility to evade its crushing blows while they attacked its weak points. The battle was fierce, and more than once it seemed the mechanical beast might overwhelm them. But they fought with a desperation born of survival, each strike a testament to their refusal to bow to the tyrant. Finally, with a well-placed strike to the creature's core, the mechanical beast collapsed, sparking and twitching in defeat. The resistance, bruised and battered, stood victorious, though barely standing. Carrick's voice rang out across the arena. "You have proven your strength, but this is only the beginning. The true trial is yet to come. Winters wiped the sweat and blood from his brow, his body aching from the intense physical test. "We're ready for whatever comes next," he said, his voice steady. The Talnari watched in silence, but Winters could see the respect in their eyes. Humanity had passed their trial, but now a much greater challenge awaited, one that would test not only their physical strength but their unity, their heart, and their spirit. The victory in the Talnari trial had earned the respect of their warriors, but Winters knew that proving their strength would be meaningless if they didn't act quickly. Carrick had been impressed, but the Talnari's alliance wasn't guaranteed. Not yet. The war was upon them, and Korak's fleet was closing in fast. It was time to move from trial to action. "We've wasted enough time. Korak will be here soon," Winters said, pacing in the war room of the Talnari stronghold. "Now we need to show them what humanity can do." Korak, standing tall with his red skin glowing under the low light, crossed his arms and regarded Winters thoughtfully. "You have proven yourselves, humans, but there is more at stake here than your survival. This world is sacred to us. If we fight, we risk everything." Winters' gaze was unwavering. "We don't have a choice. If we don't fight, Korak will destroy everything. Not just your world, but every world, every race that stands against the tyrant. We're not just fighting for ourselves. We're fighting for everyone who's ever been oppressed." The room fell silent, the weight of his words sinking in. The Talnari leader considered this for a moment before nodding, his eyes hardening with resolve. "Very well," Carrick said, his voice low and commanding. "We will stand with you. But know this, the tyrant's forces will not stop. Korak is relentless." The alliance was forged. But even as the humans and Talnari prepared for battle, they knew that their forces were outnumbered and their chances of survival slim. Korak's fleet was vast, a juggernaut of destruction. The Talnari had fought hard in the past, but they had been worn down, their numbers dwindling after years of constant skirmishes. Still, with the humans' ingenuity and the Talnari's warrior prowess, they were more than the sum of their parts. As they prepared for the coming siege, Winters gathered his commanders, Juno, Alara, and a few Talnari warriors, to lay out their strategy. The plan was simple, but the risks were high. They would lure Korak's fleet into the atmosphere of Talamara, where the dense air and mountainous terrain would give them an edge. "We need to buy time for the civilians," Winters said, pointing to a series of maps on the table. "We're going to fight on the ground, but the Talnari have hidden bunkers in the mountains. We can use them as safe havens for non-combatants." "But the tyrant's forces will be overwhelming," Juno said, her voice tight with concern. "They'll have air superiority." "That's why we need to hit them hard and fast," Winters replied. "We need to create chaos in their ranks. They won't expect an ambush in these mountains. We'll strike quickly and retreat to the bunkers if we're outnumbered." Alara spoke up, her voice calm yet filled with conviction. "And when they come after us, we'll show them what it means to fight for freedom." The resistance fighters, humans and Talnari alike, prepared for the coming battle with steely resolve. They were outmatched, outgunned, and outnumbered, but their unity, their purpose, would be their greatest strength. As the sky outside darkened and the sounds of the Talnari war drums echoed through the stronghold, Winters felt a sense of purpose stir within him. The storm was coming, and this time, they wouldn't just hide from it. They would face it head-on. The silence before the storm was deafening. Winters stood at the edge of the Talnari stronghold, staring out over the vast valley below, now bathed in the blood-red glow of the setting sun. The air was heavy with the promise of battle. It was a stark contrast to the peaceful world they had hoped to protect. Now it would become the battleground for the fate of not just Talamara, but every world under the tyrant's iron grip. The sound of war drums echoed from the Talnari village, setting the rhythm of the coming conflict. The warriors were ready, their bodies adorned with war paint, their weapons gleaming in the dim light. Beside them stood the humans, bruised, battered, but unbroken. Winters looked over his team, each face steeled with determination. There was no turning back now. Alara approached him, her eyes dark with concern but filled with resolve. The Talnari are ready, but the question remains, are we? Winters turned to her, his jaw clenched. We don't have a choice, Alara. This is it. We fight to win, or we die trying. Behind them, the Talnari warriors gathered their weapons and began preparing for the assault. Winters knew the odds were slim, but they had no other option. Their best shot at victory was striking fast, before Korrik's fleet could gain a foothold on the planet. The Tyrant's forces would land within hours, and their only hope was to cause enough chaos to disrupt the Tyrant's invasion. We'll strike at their command ship first, Winters said, pointing to a holographic display of the battlefield. If we take out their flagship, we can throw the whole fleet into disarray. The Talnari will be able to fight back. Juno, still favoring her injured side, nodded. And if we can keep them off balance, maybe we can force a retreat. Exactly, Winters said. We need to hit them hard and make them question their superiority. The first wave of Tyrant forces descended like a storm, massive warships, their black hulls blotting out the sky. The ground trembled as the enemy landed, vast numbers of heavily armed soldiers pouring out from their transports. Their footsteps shook the earth, and the air hummed with the sound of approaching destruction. The resistance fighters, human and Talnari alike, hid in the shadows, waiting for the signal. When the first blast echoed through the mountains, Winters gave the order. Now. The Talnari warriors surged from the cover of the rocks, their war cries tearing through the air. The humans followed, weapons raised, charging into the fray with a ferocity born of desperation. Explosions rocked the ground, and the sky lit up with the flashing fire of plasma weapons. Winters fought like a man possessed, his rifle roaring as he picked off enemy soldiers one by one. The Talnari were like shadows, swift and deadly as they moved through the chaos, cutting down Tyrant troops with brutal efficiency. But for every soldier they cut down, 2 more took their place. The enemy was relentless, and the ground was quickly littered with the fallen. But just as they were starting to gain ground, the unmistakable roar of Korrik's enforcer ships filled the sky. Their sheer size and firepower made them impossible to ignore. The Tyrant had brought his full might, and the battle was beginning to turn. We can't hold them off for long, Juno shouted, barely audible over the noise of the battle. We need to take out that flagship. Winters scanned the horizon, his eyes narrowing. He saw the massive command ship, hovering just above the battlefield, protected by a swarm of smaller fighters. If they didn't act now, the Talnari's defenses would be shattered before they had a chance to strike. Alara, Winters called over the comms. Get to the shuttle. We're going after the flagship. Alara responded immediately. I'm on my way. Winters turned to his team. We take that ship down. No retreat, no surrender. With renewed urgency, they fought their way through the chaos, pushing toward the heart of the enemy forces. The fate of Talamara and the galaxy itself depended on this one desperate strike. They would either cripple the Tyrant's invasion, or they would fall fighting for a cause that had to be won. The battle for Talamara raged on, but there was no turning back now. The sky above was a chaotic canvas of fire and smoke, the once pristine planet now a war-torn battlefield. Winter's heart pounded in his chest as he led his team toward the Tyrant's flagship, their only hope of victory. Korrik's forces were closing in, relentless and brutal, but they had a chance. A slim one, perhaps, but a chance nonetheless. Alara, Juno, stay close. Winters barked as he dashed toward the shuttle, the sound of blaster fire ringing in his ears. His heart raced with the weight of the mission. They had to destroy the flagship, and they had to do it before the full force of Korrik's fleet annihilated Talamara. As the shuttle's engines roared to life, the team squeezed inside. The ship's hull rattled as it took off, dodging incoming fire from enemy fighters. Alara sat at the controls, expertly weaving through the chaos. We're running out of time, Winters, the flagship's shields are strong, and they'll be expecting us. We'll deal with it, Winters replied through gritted teeth. We don't need to destroy it. We just need to make sure it can't call reinforcements. The shuttle darted toward the massive Tyrant command ship, a dark monolith suspended above the battlefield. The closer they got, the more the enemy fighters swarmed them, trying to protect their prized vessel. Alara's hands flew over the controls, her eyes locked on the view ahead. She was a master pilot, but even she knew how dire the situation was. Shields holding, she said, her voice steady, but the strain was evident. We'll be there in 30 seconds. Get ready, Winters said to his team. He looked around at Jumo, still nursing the injuries from the earlier trial, and the Talnari warriors, their faces set with the same grim determination that had carried them through countless battles. This was the moment where it all came down to one final stand. With a sharp jolt, the shuttle lurched as enemy fire rocked them. Winters gripped the armrest, his stomach tightening. They were almost there. We're in range, Alara shouted, her voice tinged with urgency, locking on to their main reactor. Do it, Winters ordered. A massive blast erupted from the shuttle's cannons, slamming into the flagship's defenses. The shields flickered, but they held. Barely. Winters knew they wouldn't last much longer. Korak's ships were closing in fast, and if they didn't break through, the mission would be over before it started. Alara pushed the shuttle into a sharp dive, evading the incoming fire as they streaked toward the flagship's exposed underbelly. With a fierce roar, she locked onto the reactor again, releasing a salvo of torpedoes that struck the heart of the ship. The flagship trembled under the impact, and the shields collapsed in a blinding flare of light. Direct hit, Alara shouted, her voice laced with disbelief. We've breached their hull. The flagship shook violently, and for a moment, it seemed like victory was within their grasp. But then the enemy fighters closed in, surrounding the shuttle in a tight formation. The resistance was out of time. Winters knew they had to finish what they started. Pull back, Winters yelled. We're going in. The shuttle's doors burst open, and Winters and his team charged onto the flagship's deck. They fought their way through hallways filled with enemy soldiers, pushing forward with a single goal in mind: to reach the heart of the ship and disable its command center. They fought with everything they had, every ounce of energy, knowing that their only chance of survival, and the survival of their world, depended on this one moment. In the heart of the flagship, Winters and his team reached the central command room. A giant control panel loomed before them, surrounded by the last remnants of Korak's elite guards. The final confrontation was at hand. We finish this now, Winters roared, charging forward with his team by his side. The battle was fierce. Korak's enforcers were unstoppable, but the resistance fighters had one advantage: their unity. They fought with the strength of 1,000 worlds, unwilling to give an inch. And finally, with one last strike, Winters disabled the flagship's core. The command ship shook violently, the engine room exploding in a flash of light. It was over. The flagship had been crippled.